It was a freezing Christmas night outside a crowded shopping mall. An old man dressed as Santa stood alone in the snow, collecting donations for hungry children and struggling families. Then a group of young men stopped in front of him. They laughed, they filmed him, and they accused him of stealing the money meant for the poor. The crowd turned, security stepped in, and Santa was about to be shut down in public. That's when a motorcycle engine cut through the noise. A tattooed biker stepped forward, with a military German shepherd at his side, and in that moment, everything changed. Oakwood was a quiet city in winter, the kind of place that felt smaller when the temperature dropped. In December, the streets were cold, gray, and often wet from melting snow. That evening, the weather was harsh. The temperature was well below freezing, and a strong wind moved through the downtown area without stopping. Snow had not fully fallen yet, but the air was heavy and cold, and small flakes began to appear as the night went on. Cars moved slowly on the roads, and people walked faster than usual, pulling their coats tighter around their bodies. Christmas lights were everywhere, on lampposts, shop windows, and small trees, but they did little to fight the cold. They only reminded people that the holiday was close. Outside the Oakwood Galleria, the largest shopping mall in the city, the contrast was clear. Inside the building, it was warm and bright. Music played through speakers, and the smell of food filled the air. Outside, near the main entrance, the wind was strong, and the sidewalk was cold and slippery. People came and went through the sliding glass doors, carrying shopping bags, talking loudly, or checking their phones. Most of them were focused on getting home quickly. Near the entrance, slightly to the side so he did not block foot traffic, stood an old man dressed as Santa Claus. His name was Walter Hayes. He was 68 years old, tall but slightly hunched from age and old injuries. His beard was real, white, and trimmed short enough to be neat. His face showed signs of a hard life, wrinkles around the eyes, rough skin, and a serious expression that softened when he smiled. His eyes were light blue and calm, and he looked directly at people without staring. His hands were large and strong, though slower than they used to be. He wore thick black gloves that had been repaired several times. Walter's Santa suit was old. The red coat was faded, and the white trim was no longer bright. The belt had cracks but still held together. The boots were real winter boots, worn but sturdy. Under the costume, Walter wore several layers of warm clothing, because standing outside for hours in this cold was dangerous, especially for someone his age. He did not complain about it. He had prepared as well as he could. Next to him was a small folding table. On it sat a clear plastic donation box and a simple handwritten sign. The sign read, "Holiday Help Fund, for kids and families in need." Under that were smaller words: meals, warm clothes, bus passes, toys. The sign was not professional, but it was neat and easy to read. Walter had made it himself at home. Walter was not begging. He was collecting donations for local families who needed help during the holidays. He worked with a nearby community kitchen and a small shelter. Everything he collected went directly to food, winter clothing, and small gifts for children. He did not receive any money for himself. He never did. Walter had been standing there since late afternoon. When he arrived, the cold had been manageable. Now, as night came, the temperature dropped further. He shifted his weight often to keep his feet warm. His left knee hurt, an old injury from his years of service. He ignored the pain. He was used to discomfort. People walked past him constantly. Some avoided eye contact, some smiled politely. A few stopped to read the sign. Walter did not call out or pressure anyone. He believed that people were more willing to help when they felt respected. A woman walked by holding her young son's hand. The boy stared at Walter's beard and red coat. Walter leaned forward slightly and spoke in a gentle voice. "Good evening," he said. "Stay warm out there." The boy did not respond, but he raised his hand in a small wave. Walter waved back. The woman smiled briefly, then continued walking. They did not donate, but Walter did not mind. Not every interaction needed to end with money. Later, a teenage boy stopped near the table. He looked unsure, glancing at the donation box and then back at Walter. He pulled a $5 bill from his pocket and dropped it into the box. Walter nodded and said, "Thank you. That will help someone eat tonight." The boy looked surprised, then nodded and walked away quickly. Walter felt grateful. Moments like that reminded him why he stayed. Walter was a retired soldier. He did not talk about his past often, and there was nothing on his clothing to show his service. He preferred it that way. After retirement, he struggled to adjust to civilian life. Crowds made him uncomfortable, loud noises bothered him, but helping others gave him purpose. Every winter, he returned to this spot. He could not fix everything, but he could do something. As the evening continued, the crowd slowly changed. Families left, replaced by tired shoppers and groups of young people. A mall security guard walked by and nodded at Walter. They had seen each other many times before. There had never been trouble. Walter nodded back. Snow began to fall more steadily. Small flakes landed on the donation box and the sign. The edges of the paper curled slightly from the moisture. Walter pressed the tape down again to keep it in place. He checked the box. There was some money inside, but not much. He knew it would not be enough for everyone who needed help, but he also knew that every dollar mattered. Two women in expensive coats stopped briefly. One asked if the donations were legitimate. Walter calmly handed her a flyer with the shelter's address and phone number. The women read it, then donated some money and left. Walter appreciated their caution. Trust was harder to earn these days. The cold grew worse as the night went on. Walter adjusted his hat and gloves. His breath was visible in the air. His back was stiff, and his legs felt heavy. For a moment, he considered leaving early. No one would blame him. But then he thought about the children waiting for gifts and the families counting on warm meals. He stayed. The mall doors opened again, and a group of young men stepped outside. They were loud, laughing, and full of energy. One of them glanced at Walter and smirked. Walter noticed immediately. His body tensed slightly, though he kept his expression calm. He had learned long ago to stay alert without reacting too quickly. The wind picked up, pushing snow across the pavement. Christmas music drifted faintly from inside the mall. Walter placed his hands on the table and stood straight. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He was not leaving his post. Not yet. The group of young men stopped a few steps away from Walter's table. There were 4 of them, all in their early 20s, dressed in expensive winter jackets and clean sneakers that were not made for snow. They looked warm, confident, and bored, the kind of people who had never needed to stand still in the cold for hours. One of them, taller than the others, stepped forward. He had short, styled hair and a sharp smile that did not reach his eyes. He looked at the donation box, then at Walter, and laughed quietly. "So this is your job tonight?" the young man said. His tone sounded playful, but there was no kindness in it. "Standing here pretending to be Santa?" Walter looked at him calmly. He had learned long ago not to match other people's energy. "I'm collecting donations for local families," Walter said. His voice was steady. "Everything goes to food and winter supplies." Another young man circled behind the table, reading the sign out loud. "Holiday Help Fund," he said, stretching the words. "That's pretty vague, don't you think?" He tapped the plastic donation box with his finger. The sound was loud in the cold air. Walter did not move. "The shelter address is on the flyer," he said. "You're welcome to check." The tall young man smiled wider. "Relax, old man. We're just asking questions." He looked around at the people walking by, then raised his voice slightly. "Hey, has anyone actually checked where this money goes?" A few people nearby slowed down. One woman stopped walking. A couple glanced over their shoulders. The mall entrance was busy, and people were always looking for something to watch. Walter felt the shift immediately. Attention was turning sharp. "I've been doing this here for 3 winters," Walter said. "Mall security knows me. The shelter knows me." "Yeah?" the young man replied. "That's what every scammer says." Walter's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his posture relaxed. "I'm not forcing anyone to donate," he said. "If you don't trust it, you can move on." Instead of moving on, the young man pulled out his phone. "Actually," he said, "I think people deserve to know who they're giving money to." He pointed the camera at Walter and the donation box. "Say hi, Santa." The other 3 laughed. One of them leaned closer to the table. "How much you make doing this?" he asked. "Bet it adds up, huh?" Walter felt heat rise in his chest, but he kept his hands on the table. He had faced worse accusations before, in places where words turned into bullets. This was different, but the feeling was familiar. "I don't make anything," he said. "I'm retired. I volunteer." "Sure you do," the tall one said. "So, where's the paperwork? Where's the license? You can't just stand here collecting cash." A man passing by slowed down and frowned. "Is this legit?" he asked no one in particular. "That's what we're trying to find out," the young man replied quickly, pleased with the attention. "Looks suspicious to me." Walter reached for the flyers. His hands were stiff from the cold, and one slipped from his fingers, landing on the wet pavement. He bent slowly to pick it up. When he straightened, the tall young man was pointing at the donation box. "Don't touch that," the young man said loudly. "You could be hiding something." Walter stopped. His patience was thinning, but he knew reacting would only make things worse. "Sir," he said, "if you have a problem, you can speak to mall security." "Already planning your exit?" Another one laughed. More people had stopped now. A small circle was forming, just enough to feel pressure. Phones came out. Whispers started. Walter could hear fragments of conversation. "Is he fake? Looks sketchy. I thought Santa was inside with the kids." Walter felt his stomach sink. This was exactly what he feared every year. Not the cold, not the pain, this moment, when good intentions were questioned publicly and doubt spread faster than truth. A security guard approached from the entrance, alerted by the raised voices. He was the same guard who had nodded earlier, but now his expression was serious. "What's going on here?" he asked. The tall young man spoke first. "This guy's collecting cash without proof," he said. "We think it's a scam." "That's not true," Walter said. He held out a flyer. "I've been cleared by management. I can show you." The guard took the flyer and glanced at it. "I'll need to check," he said carefully. "Sir, can you step back from the table for a moment?" Walter hesitated. Stepping back felt wrong, like admitting guilt, but arguing with security would only make things worse. He nodded slowly and took one step back. The tall young man smirked. "See? Won't even stand by his own table." "That's enough," the guard said, though his tone lacked strength. He was young and clearly uncomfortable with the crowd watching. "Let's all calm down." One of the other young men leaned forward suddenly. "Hey," he said, pointing at the donation box. "There's a lot in there. How do we know he didn't already take some?" "That's a lie," Walter said firmly. "I haven't touched it." "Prove it," the tall one replied. "Open it." Walter looked at the box. It was locked with a simple plastic seal, the same one he used every year. Breaking it in public would be a mistake. "I don't open it until the end of the night," he said, "with a witness from the shelter." The tall young man laughed loudly. "Convenient." The crowd murmured again. Someone shook their head. Someone else crossed their arms. Walter felt the familiar weight of being judged without evidence. He stood straight, his shoulders squared despite the ache in his back. "I serve this community," Walter said quietly. "I'm not stealing from it." The words slipped out before he could stop them. "A mistake." The tall young man's eyes lit up. "Oh, here we go," he said. "Now he's playing the veteran card." Walter closed his mouth. He had said too much. The security guard shifted his stance. "Sir," he said to Walter, "until this is cleared up, I'm going to have to ask you to shut this down for tonight." The words landed hard. Walter looked around at the faces watching him. Some curious, some suspicious, a few sympathetic. No one spoke up for him, not yet. He nodded once. Slowly, he reached for the donation box. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from anger he refused to show. Snow continued to fall, settling on the table, the sign, the red fabric of his coat. Behind the crowd, across the parking lot, a motorcycle engine started. The sound was deep and steady, cutting through the noise for just a moment before fading again. Walter did not notice, but someone else did. Walter stood beside the table as the security guard spoke quietly into his radio. The donation box was still on the table, but the guard's hand rested near it, as if ready to take control at any moment. Snow continued to fall, light but steady. The crowd did not leave. They watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The tall young man folded his arms and smiled. "Guess Santa's night is over," he said loudly. Walter said nothing. He kept his eyes forward. Years ago, he had learned that arguing in front of a crowd rarely helped. The truth did not rise faster when people were already entertained by doubt. Still, the silence hurt, not because of pride, but because the money in that box was meant for people who would never stand in this warm circle of lights. The security guard cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to Walter, "I'm going to need you to step away while we sort this out." Walter nodded slowly. He took one step back, then another. His boots left shallow prints in the thin layer of snow. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Told you." Another person shook their head and walked away, disappointed but uninterested in staying longer. The tall young man turned his phone camera back on. "Say goodbye, Santa," he said. That was when the sound returned. A motorcycle engine started again, this time much closer. The sound was low and controlled, not loud or reckless. It did not rev for attention. It simply existed, steady and heavy. A few heads in the crowd turned toward the parking lot. The motorcycle rolled into view under the streetlights. It was a large touring bike, black, clean, and well-maintained. Snow gathered on the windshield as it moved slowly toward the curb. The rider wore a dark leather jacket, thick gloves, and heavy boots. His helmet was matte black, scratched from use, not decoration. The bike stopped. The engine shut off. The rider swung his leg over and stood up. He was tall and broad, easily over 6 feet, with a solid build that came from strength, not show. His jacket shifted as he moved, revealing tattooed forearms, dark ink, clean lines, nothing flashy. His posture was relaxed but alert, the kind of posture that came from experience. He reached back and unclipped something from the side of the bike. A large German shepherd jumped down onto the pavement. The dog was tan and black, muscular, and calm. He stood close to the biker's left leg, head up, ears forward. His movements were controlled, trained. He did not bark. He did not pull. He scanned the area quietly, eyes moving from person to person. The crowd noticed immediately. Phones lowered, voices dropped. The biker removed his helmet. He had short dark hair, a rough jawline, and a face marked by small scars that suggested past accidents or fights. His eyes were dark and focused. He took a moment to look around, taking in the scene, the table, the donation box, the guard, the young men, and finally Walter. The biker walked forward slowly, the dog moving with him, staying close. He stopped a few feet away from the table. "What's going on?" the biker asked. His voice was calm, not loud, not threatening, but it carried weight. The security guard hesitated. "Sir, this is a private matter," he said. "We're handling it." The biker nodded once. "Looks public to me," he replied. He glanced at the phone still recording. "And it looks like this man's being accused of something." The tall young man scoffed. "Mind your business," he said. "This guy's running a scam." The biker turned his head and looked at him. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked. The young man shifted his weight slightly. "Is he?" the biker asked. "Yes," the young man said quickly. "No proof where the money goes." The biker looked back at Walter. "That true?" Walter met his eyes. "No," he said. "I work with a local shelter. I've been doing this for years." The biker nodded. He looked down at the donation box, then at the sign. Then he looked at the security guard. "You know him?" he asked. The guard hesitated again. "He's been here before," he admitted. "We haven't had issues in the past." "That's what I thought," the biker said. The dog took one step forward, then stopped, sitting down calmly beside the biker. His eyes stayed on the group of young men, not aggressive, but watchful. The biker crouched slightly and rested one hand on the dog's back. "This is Rex," he said, without looking away from the situation. "He doesn't like yelling." The tall young man laughed nervously. "What, you threatening us with your dog now?" The biker stood back up. "No," he said. "I'm asking questions, same as you." The security guard cleared his throat again. "Sir, unless you're involved, I need you to step back." The biker reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He opened it briefly, showing the guard a card inside. The guard leaned closer, read it, and straightened immediately. "Yes, sir," the guard said quietly. Walter noticed the change but did not ask. He had learned that some people carried authority without uniforms. The biker turned back to Walter. "You okay?" he asked. Walter nodded. "I am," he said. "I just don't want this shut down." The biker looked at the donation box again, then at the young men. "Nobody's touching anything yet," he said. "Not until there's actual proof." The tall young man opened his mouth to argue, but the biker raised one hand slightly. Not aggressive, just enough. "Let's slow this down," the biker said. "Everybody's in a hurry to judge. That usually ends badly." The crowd stayed quiet. Snow continued to fall. The Christmas lights blinked above them. Walter stood still, his hands at his sides, watching a stranger put himself between him and the noise. He did not know the biker's name. He did not know why he cared. But for the first time that night, Walter did not feel alone. The silence around the table felt heavy. People were still watching, but fewer of them were speaking. The biker's presence had changed the mood. The security guard stood straighter now, his radio quiet in his hand. The tall young man no longer smiled as easily. "Let's be clear," the tall young man said after a moment. "We didn't do anything wrong. We're just asking questions." The biker nodded slowly. Questions are fine, he said. Accusations are different. One of the other young men stepped forward. He was shorter, wearing a white jacket and a gold watch. Look, he said, pointing at the donation box. There's cash in there. Anyone could take some and no one would know. That's not true, Walter said. His voice was firm now, steadier than before. The box stays sealed. It gets opened at the shelter with staff present. Do you have proof of that with you? The young man asked. Walter paused. Not on me, he admitted. The shelter keeps the records. The tall young man jumped on it immediately. There you go, he said. No proof. The biker looked at Walter. You got a phone? He asked. Walter nodded and slowly pulled an old smartphone from his coat pocket. I can call the coordinator, he said. She'll confirm everything. Go ahead, the biker replied. Walter's fingers were stiff from the cold, and it took him a moment to unlock the phone. As he scrolled through his contacts, the tall young man shook his head. Anyone can fake a call, he said loudly. This whole thing feels off. The biker turned toward him again. You're very invested in this, he said. Why? The tall young man hesitated. Because people shouldn't be scammed. Then why are you filming instead of calling management? The biker asked calmly. The young man opened his mouth, then closed it. Walter found the number and hit call. The phone rang once, then twice. No answer. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. Walter lowered the phone. It's late, he said. She might already be home. Convenient, the tall young man muttered. The crowd murmured again, though quieter this time. Doubt was still there, but it no longer felt certain. People were watching the biker now, as much as they were watching Walter. The security guard stepped forward. Sir, he said to the biker, management hasn't responded yet. Until they do, I still need to secure the donation box. The biker nodded. Secure is fine, he said. Confiscate is not. I didn't say confiscate, the guard replied quickly. The biker looked down at the box. Then leave it where it is, he said. Nobody touches it. The guard hesitated, then nodded. All right. The tall young man crossed his arms. So, we're just supposed to trust him? He asked. No, the biker said. You're supposed to wait. One of the young men scoffed. This is a waste of time. That's easy to say when it's not your reputation on the line, the biker replied. The dog, Rex, shifted his position slightly. He stood up, moved closer to Walter, then sat again beside the table. His body was calm, but his eyes stayed on the young men. Walter noticed it immediately. You trained him well, Walter said quietly. The biker nodded. He's retired military, knows when something's not right. The tall young man laughed nervously. Now the dog's a judge too? The biker ignored him. He knelt briefly and checked Rex's collar, more out of habit than need. The name Rex was engraved cleanly on the metal tag, along with a phone number. The collar itself was worn, but well cared for. The biker stood again. Here's what's going to happen, he said. We wait for management or the shelter to confirm. If this man checks out, you walk away. And if he doesn't, the tall young man asked. Then he answers for it, the biker replied. Same as anyone else. The young man nodded slowly, but his eyes were hard. Fine, he said, but I'm not leaving. The crowd shifted as snow continued to fall. Some people grew bored and walked away. Others stayed, drawn in by the tension. A few whispered to each other, unsure which side to believe. Walter stood quietly, his hands numb, his shoulders aching. He felt exposed, like every part of his life was being weighed by strangers. He reminded himself to breathe. He reminded himself why he was there. The biker glanced at him. You did nothing wrong, he said quietly, so only Walter could hear. Walter nodded. I know, he said, but knowing doesn't always help. The biker understood that answer. In the distance, sirens sounded briefly, then faded. The mall doors slid open and shut again as more shoppers left, unaware of what was happening just a few steps away. The security guard's radio crackled suddenly. He lifted it to his ear, listening closely. Yes, he said. Understood. He looked up at the group. Management is on their way, he announced. The tall young man smiled thinly. Good, he said. Let's see how this ends. The biker placed one hand on the table, the other resting lightly near Rex's collar. He did not move. Walter stood beside him, the red of his Santa coat dusted with snow, waiting. The night was not finished yet. The mall manager arrived 10 minutes later, walking quickly through the thinning crowd. He was a middle-aged man wearing a dark coat and a tie that looked slightly loose, as if he had rushed out from somewhere warmer. His name tag clipped to his jacket read, Mark Reynolds. His face showed clear irritation, but also concern. Situations like this were bad for business. "What's going on here?" Mark asked as he approached the table. His eyes moved from the security guard to the biker, then to Walter in the Santa suit. The tall young man spoke before anyone else could. "This guy's collecting cash without proof," he said. "We think it's a scam." "That's not accurate," the security guard said quickly. "He's been allowed to collect here before." Mark frowned. "Sir," he said to Walter, "is that true?" "Yes," Walter replied calmly. "I've been here every December for the last 3 years, always with permission." Mark looked uncertain. "Do you have written approval?" "No," Walter admitted. "It was handled verbally with your office, same as last year," Mark sighed. "That's part of the problem," he said. "We need documentation." The biker stepped in slightly, not blocking anyone, but making his presence clear. "He's willing to verify everything," he said. "He's offered to call the shelter." "I already tried," Walter added. "No answer yet." The tall young man crossed his arms. "So, there's still no proof." Mark looked around at the small group watching. Phones were still out. He knew how quickly situations like this could spread online. "All right," Mark said. "Here's what we'll do. We'll temporarily secure the donation box and review our records. If everything checks out, he can continue tomorrow." Walter's shoulders tightened. "Tomorrow is Christmas Eve," he said. "The shelter needs this tonight." Mark hesitated. He did not look cruel, just overwhelmed. "I understand," he said, "but I also have to protect the mall." "That box doesn't belong to the mall," the biker said evenly, "and neither does his reputation." Mark turned to him. "And you are?" "Someone who doesn't like seeing a man judged without proof," the biker replied. The dog, Rex, shifted closer to Walter again, sitting firmly at his side. Several people noticed. "Is that a police dog?" someone whispered. The biker shook his head. "Retired military." That answer changed the tone again. People listened more carefully now. Mark rubbed his forehead. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm not accusing anyone, but this situation has drawn attention. I need to handle it cleanly." The tall young man smirked. "Finally." The biker turned toward him slowly. "You seem very confident," he said. "Enough to make accusations, film a stranger, and keep pushing even now." "So," the young man replied, "that's my right." "It is," the biker agreed. "But actions have consequences." The young man rolled his eyes. "You threatening me now?" "No," the biker said. "I'm reminding you." Mark raised his hand. "Enough," he said. "This is not helping." He turned to the security guard. "Did anyone actually see this man take money from the box?" The guard shook his head. "No." "Did anyone report missing cash?" Mark asked. "No," the guard replied again. Mark looked at the tall young man. "Then on what basis are you making this claim?" The young man hesitated for the first time. "It just doesn't feel right," he said. "That's all." A woman in the crowd spoke up. "I donated," she said. "He gave me a flyer. He didn't pressure anyone." Another voice followed. "He's been here before. I've seen him." The crowd shifted. The balance began to change. Mark took a deep breath. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do. The box stays sealed. No one touches it. We'll review last year's records tonight. If everything matches, this man leaves with the box." The tall young man opened his mouth to argue, but the biker spoke first. "And the video?" he asked. "You're going to let false accusations circulate?" Mark looked uncomfortable. "That's not something I can control." "It is," the biker said. "If you care enough." The young man scoffed. "Too late now." Walter finally spoke again. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I just want to finish what I started." Mark looked at him for a long moment. He saw the shaking hands, the tired eyes, the snow collecting on the red coat. He sighed. "Give me 5 minutes," Mark said. "I'll make a call." He stepped away, pulling out his phone. The crowd waited. Snow fell thicker now, covering the footprints on the pavement. Rex stayed still, alert but calm. The biker remained beside Walter, silent. Walter looked at him. "You didn't have to stay," he said. The biker shook his head. "Yeah," he said. "I did." Mark returned a few minutes later. His expression had changed. "I spoke to the shelter," he said. "They confirmed his name. They confirmed the partnership." A murmur ran through the crowd. The tall young man's smile faded. "But," Mark continued, "there's still one issue." Everyone looked at him. "The accusation has already been made publicly," Mark said, and now we need to deal with that. The biker's eyes narrowed slightly. Walter felt the weight of the night press down again. The truth was closer than before, but it wasn't finished yet. The mall manager's words hung in the cold air. The shelter had confirmed Walter's name in the partnership. That should have ended the situation, but it didn't. The tall young man shifted his stance. His confidence was gone now, replaced by irritation. "So what?" he said. "That doesn't prove he didn't take some money tonight." A few people in the crowd murmured again, though their voices were weaker than before. The biker turned slowly toward him. "You're still pushing this," he said, "even after confirmation." The young man shrugged. "I'm just saying, anyone could skim a little cash." The biker nodded once. "All right," he said, "then let's talk about tonight." He turned to the mall manager. "Are there cameras covering this entrance?" "Yes," Mark replied. "Multiple angles." "Good," the biker said. "Then we can stop guessing." The security guard straightened. "I can pull the footage," he said, "but it'll take a few minutes." "Do it," the biker replied. The tall young man frowned. "That's not necessary." The biker looked at him. "If you're telling the truth," he said calmly, "you shouldn't be worried." The guard spoke into his radio and began walking toward the security office inside the mall. The crowd leaned closer, curious again. Some people stayed, others drifted away. Those who remained wanted answers now, not drama. Walter stood quietly, his hands clasped in front of him. His fingers were numb, but his mind was clear. He had nothing to hide. The biker glanced at him. "You all right?" he asked. Walter nodded. "I am," he said. "Just tired." "I get that," the biker replied. A few minutes passed. Snow continued to fall, collecting on shoulders and hats. The donation box sat untouched on the table, the plastic seal still intact. The tall young man spoke again, his voice sharper now. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We're standing around freezing because of an old man in a costume." That was enough. The biker stepped closer, just one step, but it changed everything. "Watch how you talk," he said. His voice did not rise, but it became firm. "You made this public. You don't get to rush the truth now." The young man opened his mouth, then stopped. He looked around and realized the crowd was no longer on his side. A woman near the edge of the group spoke up. "If he's legit, you owe him an apology." Another man nodded. "Yeah, this went too far." The tall young man looked away, jaw tight. The security guard returned from inside the mall. "We have the footage," he said, "from the last hour." Mark leaned forward. "What does it show?" The guard hesitated. "It shows the table clearly. The box never left the old man's sight." Walter closed his eyes briefly. "And?" the biker asked. "And," the guard continued, "it also shows something else." The tall young man stiffened. "One of the accusers," the guard said carefully, "leaned over the table earlier. His hand went near the box." The crowd reacted immediately. "What? Seriously?" "Rewind that," the guard nodded. "We did. He didn't take anything," he said, "but he did touch the box. He tested the seal." The biker turned his head slowly and looked at the tall young man. "You," he said. "Why?" The young man's face flushed. "I was just checking." "Checking what?" the biker asked. "You said you were worried about theft." The young man stammered. "I wanted to see if it was fake." The biker didn't respond. He let the silence do the work. Mark took a deep breath. "So to be clear," he said, "there is no evidence this man took any money." "That's correct," the guard replied. Mark nodded. "Then this accusation has no basis." The crowd shifted again. This time the mood was different. People were no longer curious. They were uncomfortable. The tall young man laughed weakly. "All right, fine," he said. "Maybe we overreacted." "That's not overreacting," the biker said. "That's making an accusation in public." Walter finally spoke. "I don't want this to get worse," he said quietly. "I just want to go home when I'm done." Mark looked at him. "You should never have been put in this position," he said. "I apologize." He turned to the young men. "You need to leave." "What?" the tall one snapped. "You caused a disturbance and made a false claim," Mark replied. "Leave." The young men exchanged looks, then turned and walked away without another word. As they disappeared into the parking lot, the crowd slowly began to disperse. Some people stayed behind. A woman stepped forward and dropped a bill into the donation box. Another followed, then another. Walter watched, surprised. The biker remained beside him, silent. The night was still cold. Walter was still tired, but the truth was finally standing on his side. The crowd thinned quickly after the young men were forced to leave. Most people had already gotten what they wanted. An answer. The tension that had filled the air slowly faded, replaced by an awkward calm. Snow continued to fall, lighter now, settling quietly on the ground. Walter stood beside the table, unsure what to do next. The donation box was still there. The sign was still taped to the front. Everything looked the same, but the feeling was different. The mall manager cleared his throat. "You can continue," he said, "if you want to." Walter hesitated. His hands were numb, and his body felt heavy. He had planned to stand there until closing, but the night had taken more out of him than expected. He looked at the box, then at the few people who remained nearby. "I'll stay a little longer," he said finally, "as long as it's all right." "It is," the manager replied. "I'll make sure no one bothers you." He nodded once at the biker, then walked back toward the entrance. The security guard followed, leaving Walter and the biker alone near the table. Rex lay down beside Walter's boots, his body blocking some of the wind. Walter noticed and gave a small smile. "Thank you," Walter said quietly. Not sure if he meant the dog, the biker, or both. The biker nodded. "You did most of the work yourself," he said. They stood in silence for a moment. The Christmas music drifting from inside the mall sounded softer now, less distracting. A middle-aged woman approached slowly. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure she was welcome. "I'm sorry," she said to Walter. "I shouldn't have assumed." Walter shook his head. "It's all right," he said. "It happens." She placed some money in the box, then walked away without another word. More people followed. Not many, just enough. Walter realized something then. The night was not about how much money was collected anymore. It was about finishing what he started without being pushed aside. The biker watched the small exchanges carefully. "You always do this alone?" he asked. "Usually," Walter replied. "Sometimes volunteers help during the day. Nights are quieter." "Harder, too," the biker said. Walter nodded. "Yes." The biker looked down at Rex. "He doesn't like crowds either," he said. "We understand each other." Walter glanced at the dog. "Military?" he asked. The biker nodded. "Both of us." That was enough explanation. Walter did not ask more, and the biker did not offer it. The wind shifted again, cutting through the open space near the entrance. Walter pulled his coat tighter. The biker noticed. "You should wrap up soon," he said. "You've been out here a long time." Walter considered it. "After one more hour," he said. "That's my usual rule." The biker nodded. "I'll stay." Walter looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," the biker replied. "I want to." They stood, together, watching people pass. No one challenged them now, no one filmed. The moment had passed. A young couple stopped briefly. They donated and smiled. A man in a work jacket dropped some coins into the box and gave a short nod. A child waved at Santa again, and this time Walter waved back with more ease. The biker leaned against the wall near the entrance, arms crossed loosely. Rex stayed near Walter, occasionally lifting his head when someone came close, then relaxing again. Walter felt the cold less now, not because the temperature had changed, but because the weight on his chest had lifted. When the hour passed, Walter checked his watch. "That's it," he said. The biker stepped closer. "Need help packing up?" Walter nodded. "That would be appreciated." They folded the table together. Walter lifted the donation box carefully, cradling it with both arms. The plastic seal was still unbroken. "I'll walk you to your car," the biker said. Walter smiled faintly. "Thank you." They moved across the parking lot slowly. Snow covered the lines between the spaces. Walter's old sedan sat near the far edge, its windshield frosted over. Walter unlocked the car and placed the donation box on the back seat. He stood there for a moment, looking at it. "You did good tonight," the biker said. Walter shook his head. "We did," he replied. The biker extended his hand. "Name's Jack," he said. Walter took it. Walter. Their handshake was firm and brief. Rex lifted his head and wagged his tail once. As Jack walked back toward his motorcycle, Walter sat in the driver's seat and started the engine. The heater took a moment to warm up. For the first time that night, Walter felt something close to peace. The city was still cold. The world was still uncertain. But the night had ended differently than it began. Walter drove slowly through the quiet streets of Oakwood. Snow covered the sidewalks and the edges of the road, and most houses were dark. It was late, but the city was not asleep. Not on a night like this. Jack rode behind him on the motorcycle, keeping a safe distance. Rex sat steady in the side carrier, his body relaxed but alert. The sound of the engine was steady, not loud, not rushed. They reached a small building near the edge of the downtown. The sign above the door read Oakwood Community Kitchen. One light was still on inside. Walter parked and turned off the engine. "This is where it goes," he said as Jack pulled in beside him. Jack nodded. "Good place." They carried the donation box inside together. The warmth hit them immediately. The smell of soup and bread filled the room. Inside, a woman in her 40s stood behind a counter, tying off plastic containers. She wore a thick sweater and had her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked bored but focused. "Walter," she said, surprised. "You're late." "Rough night," Walter replied. She noticed Jack and Rex. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. "Friends?" "Helpers," Jack said. Walter placed the box on the counter. The woman checked the seal and nodded. "Still intact." She broke it open carefully and began counting. Not much, but enough. She smiled. "This will cover tomorrow morning, and some coats." Walter let out a slow breath. Jack watched quietly. He had seen many kinds of missions before, but this one felt different. There were no orders, no pressure, just people doing what needed to be done. Rex lay down near the door, resting his head on his paws. "Can you use extra hands?" Jack asked. The woman looked up. "Always." Jack rolled up his sleeves. "Point me where you need me." They worked for over an hour, packing meals, carrying boxes, cleaning counters. Walter moved slower than Jack, but he knew where everything went. This place was familiar to him. Outside, the snow fell thicker. When they finished, the woman handed Walter a clipboard. "These go out tomorrow night," she said. "Families on the list." Walter nodded. "I'll be back." Jack glanced at the names. "Some of these near the old rail yard?" "Yes," she said. "People who won't come inside." Jack nodded once. "We'll handle those." Walter looked at him. "You don't have to." Jack met his eyes. "I know." They loaded the meals and coats into Walter's car and Jack's bike storage. The cold hit again when they stepped outside, but it felt manageable now. They drove toward the rail yard. The buildings there were old and half abandoned. A few tents and makeshift shelters were hidden between concrete walls. Walter approached carefully, calling out softly, "It's Walter. Food and blankets." People emerged slowly, cautious at first, then relieved. Jack stayed back, letting Walter lead. Rex sat calmly, his presence quiet but reassuring. They handed out meals, coats, gloves, no speeches, no photos. One man looked at Jack's tattoos and froze. Rex stepped forward and sat down gently. "He's okay," Jack said. "So am I." The man nodded and took the food. When the last package was handed out, the night felt still again. Walter leaned against his car, breathing slowly. "This is the part most people don't see," he said. Jack nodded. "Doesn't mean it doesn't matter." They stood there for a moment, two men and a dog, watching snow fall over a city that would wake up soon and forget what happened in the dark. But they wouldn't forget. The night wasn't over yet. By the time they finished near the rail yard, it was already close to midnight. Snow covered the ground completely now, softening the sharp edges of the city. The wind had calmed, but the cold remained. Walter checked his watch and sighed quietly. "It's Christmas Eve," he said. "I didn't think it would get this late." Jack nodded. "That's usually how it goes." They drove back toward the center of Oakwood, streets nearly empty. Most stores were closed. Houses glowed softly from behind curtains. Somewhere, music played faintly through a window. It was the kind of night where everything felt slower. Walter parked near the community kitchen again to drop off the empty containers. When he stepped back outside, he hesitated. "You got somewhere to be?" he asked Jack. Jack shook his head. "No family around here," he said. "Just Rex." Walter considered that for a moment. "I live a few blocks away," he said. "Nothing fancy, but I usually make soup on Christmas Eve. You're welcome to join us." Jack looked surprised. He didn't answer right away. Rex lifted his head, ears alert. "I don't want to impose," Jack said finally. "You wouldn't be," Walter replied. "I'd appreciate the company," Jack nodded. "All right." Walter's apartment was small and old, on the second floor of a brick building. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and cleaning solution. Walter unlocked the door and stepped inside, turning on the lights. The apartment was simple, a small couch, a table with 2 chairs, shelves filled with books and old photographs. A modest Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with a few ornaments and white lights. Nothing expensive, everything clean. Jack took off his jacket and placed it over a chair. Rex lay down near the heater, letting out a long breath. Walter moved into the kitchen. "Soup will take a bit," he said. "You can sit." Jack looked around. "You've lived here long?" "Since I retired," Walter replied. "Keeps things quiet." They spoke while Walter worked. Simple conversation, where Jack grew up, why he rode, why Rex stayed close to him. Jack did not share details easily, but he did not avoid them either. He spoke plainly, without drama. Walter poured soup into bowls and placed them on the table. They ate slowly, in comfortable silence. "This beats standing outside," Jack said. Walter smiled. "It usually does." After dinner, Walter stood and reached for a small box under the tree. "I don't usually exchange gifts," he said, "but I keep something for kids who come by, shelter families." He opened the box. Inside were simple toys, neatly wrapped. Jack looked at them, then at Walter. "They'll like these," Jack said. "I hope so," Walter replied. A knock sounded at the door. Walter frowned. "That's strange." He opened it carefully. A young mother stood in the hallway with 2 children bundled in coats. The boy held a small paper bag. "Sorry," she said. "You said we could stop by." Walter's face softened immediately. "Of course." The children stepped inside, eyes wide at the Christmas tree. Walter handed them each a gift. The boy gave Walter the paper bag. "For Santa," he said. Walter opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn card, a red figure with a white beard and a heart drawn on the chest. Walter swallowed hard. "Thank you," he said. Jack watched quietly. Rex wagged his tail once. When the family left, the apartment felt warmer than before. Walter sat down slowly. "That's why I do it," he said. Jack nodded. "I figured." They sat in silence as the clock ticked toward midnight. Outside, snow continued to fall. Somewhere in the city, church bells rang softly. "Merry Christmas," Walter said. "Merry Christmas," Jack replied. The night felt complete, but the story wasn't finished yet. Walter woke up early, as he always did. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. A thin layer of white covered the streets and rooftops, making Oakwood look calm for the first time in days. He stood by the window for a moment, then turned toward the living room. Jack was asleep on the couch, still wearing a clean t-shirt, his jacket folded neatly on the chair beside him. Rex lay on the floor near the heater, his body stretched out, breathing slow and steady. Walter moved quietly into the kitchen and started coffee. The familiar sound filled the room. Jack woke a few minutes later and sat up, rubbing his face. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Walter replied. "Coffee's almost ready." They drank in silence at the table. No rush, no tension, just the sound of the heater and the clock on the wall. After breakfast, Walter put on his coat. "We've got one more stop," he said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Where to?" "The shelter," Walter replied. "They're short on hands Christmas morning," Jack nodded. "Figures." They loaded a few remaining boxes into Walter's car and drove through quiet streets. Families were starting to wake up. A few kids were already outside, laughing, throwing snow. At the shelter, volunteers moved quickly, organizing lines and handing out meals. Walter stepped in like he had done many times before. Jack followed without being asked. Rex stayed near the door, calm and watchful. A volunteer noticed Jack's tattoos and hesitated. Walter spoke first. "He's with me." That was enough. They worked through the morning, serving food, carrying supplies, talking when needed, staying quiet when not. One older man stopped in front of Walter. "You're the Santa from the mall," he said. Walter nodded. "That was me." The man smiled. "Saw what happened. You handled it right." Walter shrugged. "I had help." The man glanced at Jack. "Looks like it." By noon, the rush slowed. The shelter felt lighter. People were fed. Kids were warm. Walter stood by the doorway and watched Jack kneel to let Rex greet a child carefully. The child laughed and hugged the dog without fear. Walter felt something settle in his chest. Later, outside the shelter, Jack adjusted his gloves. "I head out tomorrow," he said. "Long ride." Walter nodded. "You're welcome back any time." Jack hesitated. "You know, I don't usually stop. Not like this." "I figured," Walter said. Jack looked at him. "Glad I did." They shook hands again, firmer this time. Rex barked once, tail wagging. Jack put on his helmet and started the motorcycle. Before leaving, he turned back. "You're not alone out here," he said. "Not anymore." Walter nodded. The motorcycle disappeared down the street. Walter stood there for a moment, then turned back toward the shelter. There was still work to do. There always would be. But this Christmas was different. The city was still cold, problems still existed. People would still doubt, still judge. But Walter knew something now. Good people find each other. Sometimes it happens quietly. Sometimes it happens in the cold, and sometimes it happens right when it's needed most. Sometimes miracles don't come from the sky. They come through people who choose kindness. On that cold Christmas night, God didn't send angels. He sent courage, truth, and compassion. In our daily lives, every small act of love matters. Every time we stand up for what's right, we become part of God's work in this world. If this story touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect you, and bring peace to your life. Amen.